All right. Hi, everyone. It's time for me to be further confused by the color of magic. This is the first part, or the first part of this book that I'm reading, and this is the second video, if you happen to stumble on this. The status of footpad ill suits us, said the barbarian, but as you say, times are hard and there are no soft beds tonight. He shifted his grip on his sword, and the leading rider drew near. He stepped out onto the road with a hand held up and his face set in a grin nicely calculated to reassure yet threaten. Your pardon, sir, he began. The rider reined in his horse and drew back his hood. The big man looked into a face blotched with superficial burns and punctuated by tufts of singed beard. Even the eyebrows had gone. Bugger off, said the face. You're Bravid the Hublander, aren't you? Bravid became aware that he had fumbled the initiative. Just go away, will you? Said the rider. I just haven't got time for you. Do you understand? Nope. He looked around and added, That goes for your shadow-loving fleabag partner, too, whatever he's hiding. The weasel stepped up to the horse and peered at the disheveled figure. Why, it's Rincewind. Rincewind, the wizard, isn't it? He said in tones of delight, meanwhile filing the wizard's description of him in his memory for leisurely vengeance. I thought I recognized the voice. Bravid spat and sheathed his sword. It was seldom worth tangling with wizards. They so rarely had any treasure worth speaking of. What? He talks pretty big for a gutter wizard, he muttered. You don't understand at all, said the wizard wearily. I'm so scared of you my spine has turned to jelly. It's just that I'm suffering from an overdose of terror right now. I mean, when I've got over that, then I'll have time to be decently frightened of you. The weasel pointed toward the burning city. You've been through that? He asked. The wizard rubbed a raw, red hand across his eyes. I was there when it started. See him? Back there? He pointed back down the road to where his traveling companion was still approaching, having adopted a method of riding that involved falling out of the saddle every few seconds. Well, said Weasel. He started it, said Rincewind simply. Bravid and Weasel looked at the figure, now hopping across the road with one foot in a stirrup. Fire-razor, is he? Said Bravid at last. No, said Rincewind, not precisely. Let's just say that if complete and utter chaos were lightning, then he'd be the sort to stand on a hilltop in a thunderstorm, wearing wet copper armor and shouting, All gods are bastards. Got any food? There's some chicken, said Weasel, in exchange for a story. What's his name? Said Bravid, who tended to lag behind in conversations. Two Flower. Two Flower, said Bravid. What a funny name. You, said Rincewind, dismounting, do not know the half of it. I don't either. I don't understand. Chicken, you say? Deviled, said Weasel. The wizard groaned. That reminds me, added the weasel, snapping his fingers. There was a really big explosion about, half an hour ago. That was the oil bond store going up, said Rincewind, wincing at the memory of the burning rain. Weasel turned and grinned expectantly at his companion, who grunted and handed over a coin from his pouch. Then there was a scream from the roadway, cut off abruptly. Rincewind did not look up from his chicken. One of the things he can't do, he can't ride a horse, he said. Then he stiffened as if sandbagged by a sudden recollection, gave a small yelp of terror, and dashed into the gloom. When he returned, the being called Two Flower was hanging limply over his shoulder. It was small and skinny, and dressed very oddly in a pair of knee-length breeches and a shirt in such a violent and vivid conflict of colors that Weasel's fastidious eye was offended even in the half-light. No bones broken by the feel of things, said Rincewind. He was breathing heavily. Bravid winked at the weasel and went to investigate the shape that they assumed was a pack animal. You'd be wise to forget it, said the wizard, without looking up from his examination of the unconscious Two Flower. Believe me, a power protects it. A spell? Said Weasel, squatting down. No, but magic of a kind, I think. Not the usual sort. I mean, it can turn gold into copper, while at the same time it is still gold. It makes men rich by destroying their possessions. It allows the weak to walk fearlessly among thieves. It passes through the strongest doors to reach the most protected treasures. Even now it has me enslaved, so that I must follow this madman willy-nilly and protect him from harm. It's stronger than you, Bravid. It is, I think, more cunning even than you, Weasel. What's it called, then, this mighty magic? Rincewind shrugged. In our tongue it is called reflected sound as of underground spirits. Is there any wine? You must know that I am not without artifice where magic is concerned, said Weasel. Only last year did I, assisted by my friend there, part the notoriously powerful archmage of Ementary from his staff, his belt of moon jewels, and his life, in that approximate order. I do not fear this reflected sound of underground spirits of which you speak. However, he added, you engage my interest. Perhaps you would care to tell me more. Bravid looked at the shape on the road. It was closer now and clearer in the pre-dawn light. It looked for all the world like a box on legs, he said. I'll tell you about it, said Rincewind. If there's any wine, that is. Down in the valley, There was a roar and a hiss. Someone more thoughtful than the rest had ordered to be shut the big river gates that were at this point I'm sorry, I've messed up the sentence. Someone more thoughtful than the rest had ordered to be shut the big river gates that were at the point where the Ankh flowed out of the Twin City. Denied its usual egress, the river had burst its banks and was pouring down the fire-ravaged streets. Soon the continent of flame became a series of islands, each one growing smaller as the dark tide rose, and up from the city of fumes and smoke rose a broiling cloud of steam covering the stars. Weasel thought that it looked like some dark fungus or mushroom. What is happening? The twin city of Proud Ankh and pestilent Moorpark. I keep saying Moorpark because it's a city that I've been to, and I look at that and I'm like, oh, Moorpark in California. And pestilent Moorpark, of which all the other cities of time and space are, as it were, mere reflections, has stood many assaults in its long and crowded history, and has always risen to flourish again. So the fire and its subsequent flood, which destroyed everything left that was not flammable, and added a particularly noisome flux to the survivors' problems, did not mark its end. Rather, it was a fiery punctuation mark, a coal-like comma or salamander semicolon in a continuing story. I love that sentence. That's a great sentence. Several days before these events, a ship came up the Ankh on the dawn tide and fetched up, among many others, in the maze of wharves and docks on the Moorpark shore. It carried a cargo of pink pearls, milk nuts, pumice. I've never said that word aloud. Pumice? Yep. I'm just going to keep making sounds, and words will stop having any meaning. Some official letters for the patrician of Ankh, and a man. It was the man who engaged the attention of Blind Hugh, one of the beggars on early duty at the Pearl Dock. He nudged Cripple Wah in the ribs and pointed wordlessly. Now the stranger was standing on the quayside, watching several straining seamen carry a large, brass-bound chest down the gangplank. Another man, obviously the captain, was standing beside him. There was about the seaman every nerve in Blind Hugh's body, which tended to vibrate in the presence of even a small amount of impure gold at 50 paces, screamed into his brain the air of one anticipating imminent enrichment. Sure enough, when the chest had been deposited on the cobbles, the stranger reached into a pouch, and there was the flash of a coin. Several coins. Gold. Blind Hugh, his body twanging like a hazel rod in the presence of water, whistled to himself. Then he nudged Wah again, and sent him scurrying off down a nearby alley into the heart of the city. When the captain walked back onto his ship, leaving the newcomer looking faintly bewildered on the quayside, Blind Hugh snatched up his begging cup and made his way across the street with an ingratiating leer. At the sight of him, the stranger started to fumble urgently with his money pouch. "Good day to thee, sire," Blind Hugh began, and found himself looking up into a face with 4 eyes in it. He turned to run. That can't be an error, because it's Terry Pratchett, so it can't be an error. Exclamation point, said the stranger. It doesn't spell it out, it's just an exclamation point. And grabbed his arm. He was aware that the sailors lining the rail of the ship were laughing at him. At the same time, his specialized senses detected an overpowering impression of money. He froze. The stranger let go and quickly thumbed through a small black book he had taken from his belt. Then he said, "Hello." "What?" said Hugh. The man looked blank. "Hello?" he repeated, rather louder than necessary, and so carefully that Hugh could hear the vowels tinkling into place. "Hello yourself," Hugh riposted. The stranger smiled widely, fumbled yet again in the pouch. This time his hand came out holding a large gold coin. It was in fact slightly larger than an $8,000 Ankian crown, and the design on it was unfamiliar, but it spoke inside Hugh's mind in a language he understood perfectly. "My current owner," it said, "is in need of succor and assistance. Why not give it to him, so you and me can go off somewhere and enjoy ourselves?" Subtle changes in the beggar's posture made the stranger feel more at ease. He consulted the small book again. "I wish to be directed to a hotel, tavern, lodging-house, inn, hospice, caravanserai," he said. "What, all of them?" said Hugh, taken aback. "Question mark," said the stranger. Oh my god, what the fuck? Hugh was aware that a small crowd of, fishwives, shellfish diggers, and freelance coppers were watching them with interest. "Look," he said, "I know a good tavern. Is that enough?" He shuddered to think of the gold coin escaping from his life. He'd keep that one even if he more confiscated all the rest. And the big chests that comprised most of the newcomer's luggage looked to be full of gold. Hugh decided. The 4-eyed man looked at his book. "Does he mean literally 4 eyes or like glasses? Because, I always called Four Eyes growing up. Excuse me. I would like to be directed to a hotel, please. A place of repose, tavern. Yes, all right, come on, said Hugh hurriedly. He picked up one of the bundles and walked away quickly. The stranger, after a moment's hesitation, strolled after him. A train of thought shunted its way through Hugh's mind. Getting the newcomer to the Broken Drum so easily was a stroke of luck, no doubt of it. Any more would probably reward him. But for all his new acquaintance's mildness, there was something about him that made Hugh uneasy, and for the life of him he couldn't figure out what it was. Not the 2 extra eyes, odd though they were. Okay, so it is 2 extra eyes. There was something else. He glanced back. The little man was ambling along in the middle of the street, looking around him with a keen expression of interest. Something else Hugh saw nearly made him gibber. The massive wooden chest, which he had last seen resting solidly on the quayside, was falling on its master's heels with a gentle, rocking gait. Oh, it's Two-Flower. Slowly, in a case of sudden movement on his part might break his fragile control over his own legs, Hugh bent slightly so that he could see under the chest. There were lots and lots of little legs. Very deliberately, Hugh turned around and walked very carefully toward the Broken Drum. What is this book? Odd, said Emor. He had this big wooden chest, added Cripplewaw. He'd have to be a merchant or a spy, said Emor. He pulled a scrap of meat from the cutlet in his hand and tossed it into the air. It hadn't reached the zenith of its arc before a black shape detached itself from the shadows in the corner of the room and swooped down, taking the morsel in midair. What is that? A merchant, or a spy, repeated Emor. I'd prefer spy. A spy pays for himself twice, because there's always the reward when we turn him in. What do you think, Waythel? Opposite Emor was the second greatest thief in Ankh-Morpork, half closed his one eye and shrugged. I've checked on the ship, he said. It's a freelance trader. Does the occasional run to the Brown Islands? People there are just savages. They better not be full of brown people. They don't understand about spies, and I expect they eat merchants. He looked a little bit like a merchant, volunteered Wah, except he wasn't fat. There was a flutter of wings at the window. Emor shifted his bulk out of the chair and crossed the room, coming back with a large raven. Oh, that must be... Oh, the raven, the big black... Okay. After he'd unfastened the message capsule from its leg, it flew up to join its fellows lurking among the rafters. Withal regarded it without love. Emor's ravens were notoriously loyal to their master, to the extent that Withal's one attempt to promote himself to the rank of greatest thief in Ankh-Morpork had cost their master's right-hand man his left eye. But not his life, however. Emor never grudged a man his ambitions. B12, said Emor, tossing the little file aside and unrolling the tiny scroll within. Gorin the cat, said Withel automatically, on station up in the gong tower at the Temple of the Small Gods. He says Hugh has taken our stranger to the Broken Drum. Well, that's good enough. Broadman is a friend of ours, isn't he? Aye, said Withel, if he knows what's good for trade. Among his customers has been your man Gorin, said Emor pleasantly, for he writes here about a box on legs, if I read this scrawl correctly. He looked at Withel over the top of the paper. Withel looked away. He will be disciplined, he said flatly. Oh, but he's telling the truth. Wall looked at the man leaning back in his chair, his black-clad frame resting as nonchalantly as a rimled puma on a jungle branch, and decided that Gorin atop Small God's temple would soon be joining those little deities in the multifold dimensions of beyond, and he owed Wah 3 copper pieces. Multifold dimensions. That means I'm reading 2 books about multiple universes. Emor crumpled the note and tossed it into a corner. I think we'll wander along to the drum later on, Withel. Perhaps, too, we may try this beer that your men find so tempting. Withel said nothing. Being Emor's right-hand man was like being gently flogged to death with scented bootlaces. I have no idea what I just read. I have no idea. What the fuck? What just happened?